From the Surveyor Newsroom in sunny Miami, welcome to the Miami Real Estate Podcast, your home for expert insight on all things Miami real estate. I'm your host, Omar DeWint. Let's get started. In the minds of most, Miami means beach scenes, neon-lit Deco hotels, and thumping nightclubs in the core of South Beach. And for good reason. It was the most vibrant scene in town for decades. That has all changed, however. These days, some of the best finds in the city lie in pockets outside the normal tourist haunts. Here, joining us in the studio to break down the Magic City's most dynamic areas and how to enjoy them, my friend and editor-in-chief of American Way magazine, Bill Kearney. Bill, thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
So we've got some fun stuff in line for today. We're really going to break down Miami like a local, as we like to say. But before we get to it, Bill, why don't you, by way of introduction, give our audience a little bit of background on yourself and how you got to Miami.
Okay, so born in Chicago, raised in Pennsylvania, spent a good stint of time in New York City after college as a TV producer and writer. Got kind of beat up by New York a little bit. I needed some horizons and some fishing and some physical beauty. So I ended up in Miami, and the work that I was more attracted to here was more print and magazine work and continuing the writing stuff. So long story short, I jumped around from editing Thrillist, which was one of the early kind of email magazines for men.
That was when we first met.
That's how we first met. You were at Terra Inc.
Yep.
And you guys helped me out quite a bit. That was like a daily kind of bang it out, put the stories out, get scoops.
Mm-hmm.
That was a fun gig, but it really gave me a very connected sense to the community, really, because I was meeting with chefs and restaurateurs and boutique owners on a daily basis and
Not
just turning that story around, very quickly. So I got to meet a lot of people through that job. And from there, I ended up at Ocean Drive Magazine as a deputy editor, spent 4 years there, did some, which again is very obviously about Miami. Mm-hmm. So that made some nice connections there with people like David Grutman in the nightlife scene, and really writing about the people who make things happen in Miami.
Sure.
And getting a pretty good sense of the real estate scene there as well, just because developers here are so important in terms of even just neighborhoods changing and kind of them bringing a vision to how a place can work. Mm-hmm. And now I work as the editor-in-chief of American Way magazine, and I also oversee Nexos, which is the Spanish and Portuguese language magazine for the airline, and Celebrated Living, which is the premium cabin magazine.
Right.
So American Way is 12 issues a year, and the other two magazines are six issues a year. They kind of alternate month by month.
So in terms of the daily balance, it's a little bit easier workload than the Thrillist days, right?
I don't know if it's easier. It's just more about the future.
Sure.
Like just more planning. But it is less of a little less of a grind, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. It's been an amazing journey, and I personally have enjoyed, working with you throughout that process. But so let's talk about, we have a saying here in Miami, if you haven't been to Miami in the last 5 years, you haven't been to Miami. As somebody who arrived here as a transplant and has witnessed this evolution, what would you, in your opinion, what is the most significant shift or process that took place in the last 5 years?
Well, let me start. I'm going to go back a little bit. I arrived in 2002, and at that time, South Beach was the real epicenter of pretty much everything. Mm-hmm. And the last 5 years are indicative of the last 15, but I would just say there's an acceleration of areas outside the beach becoming much more interesting, much more dynamic, and creating a stage, if you will, for businesses, and for developments, for restaurants. So now instead of just having one kind of central stage, you've got, you might say there's five areas, or it doesn't really matter what number you put on it. There's just a lot more landscape where businesses can thrive. And then the flip side of that is where different audiences can be served.
Right.
As a local, I feel like there's so much more for me to do now than there was 5-10 years ago.
I agree. I feel like, my wife and I, Christina, we rarely go to the beach. I mean, if we can avoid it, we do, because there's so much to do here in Brickell and
Right.
Wynwood Design District, et cetera.
Sure. I mean, and so this is something we wrote about in the magazine recently. We decided to kind of break Miami down into 5 different neighborhoods, digestible neighborhoods, geared toward. I mean, the story is geared toward a traveler.
Sure.
So to
travel
kind
like
of
a pro,
help
right?
you kind of mentally navigate this, pretty vast area and how to break it down. Like maybe you want to spend a day on the Upper East Side and attach that to a little foray into the Design District or Wynwood, or maybe you want to head south and hit Coral Gables, Coconut Grove, and Key Biscayne. So we just tried to make this story break down into these digestible, navigable
So walk
sections.
me through those sections a little bit from the story. I know we started with Wynwood and the Design District area. What is happening there?
So, Wynwood has, to me, one of the real elements of Wynwood that is quickly evolving is the residential aspect of it, because that initially, the area quickly became valuable retail-wise, and there's a ton of foot traffic now. But the retail development has lagged behind, in part because of zoning, but a lot of that has been cleared up. There's been zoning has allowed for more units per acre, which allows for more affordable units, which then allows for different demographics to move in and really kind of keep the area alive. So Wynwood's a work in progress.
Yeah.
I think it blew up really fast.
It did. I remember, so going back to 2010 when you were here, so I was at Terra Inc., and one of my first clients was Cafeina, the Wynwood Lounge, and they're actually still there today. Shout out to Yvette if you're listening. But I remember when, at the time, it was like trying to get media to go to Wynwood. They were like, where were you sending me? Like, we had to basically get taxis, because this was before Uber, to get journalists and editors over there, because they would get lost. But now Wynwood is like the international hotspot in Miami.
Yeah, I go there to shop. I go there to eat. Like I go to a gym nearby there, and I'll stop at there's probably 3 or 4 poke places now in Wynwood, so I'll just stop and get some poke.
Warby Parker's there.
Glasses. Definitely excellent. Some really nice menswear.
And the second Saturday of every month, they have the art walk still, I believe.
Right, and they still have it's crazy to think that this would be considered old school Wynwood, meaning like a decade ago.
Right.
But Gramps is still thriving, and that's a bar that I really like because it is a little scruffy.
Right.
It's down to earth. Actually, it's funny. I've talked to Adam, the owner, about this, and bars are weird in Miami because there's not a lot of places where you can just go to a simple bar where you can get a beer and have a conversation. But Gramps, and having lived in New York, that's really important there. It's a night. You kind of need that when you leave the office and you don't want to go back to your little boxy apartment just yet.
Right.
So Gramps kind of is in that direction, which I love. It's got this line of, pretty ample-sized booths where you sit there with 3 or 4 of your friends and shoot the breeze.
And the cocktails are not $10 a piece.
Miami is never really affordable, but it's definitely kind of, you feel like there's value there.
Yeah. Well, and I think kudos first, we have to acknowledge, of course, Tony Goldman, who made all that possible in the area and just had that vision for what that could become.
Yeah, he's, he was a visionary in Soho in New York as well, in terms of just approaching a somewhat dilapidated area that had a lot of warehouse space. And what I found, I've written about Tony's efforts, and his approach was to create what he called charisma in an area, and he did that with street art in Wynwood, and that obviously took off far beyond his efforts, but it worked. It it was like this kind of smorgasbord of like visual stimulation as you walk through that neighborhood. Even when it was, Panther Coffee was like the only thing open.
Right.
And it just created a lot of traction. It's been an amazing transformation.
Absolutely.
And, people complain about the price, places are being priced out. Like some galleries have been priced out, and they've moved north to the Upper East Side. Several of them, which again, that's like a whole nother story.
Yeah. Well, and before we get into Upper East Side, speaking of transformation, what do you think about what's happening in Design District? I mean, they've had a complete overhaul, right?
What's funny is I used to live a couple blocks north of there, and for a long time there was just this amazing neighborhood with some ridiculously high-end retail and not a lot of humans. It was just like almost like a film set for a while. It was like, wow, this is where you shoot a film about fancy people. But I have to say, in the last year, it's just it turned a corner. I mean, it really is astounding when you just stroll through there, and there's just a lot more people there. It's way more bustling and dynamic and just more energetic. I mean, it's you build it, they will come, and it actually seems to be working.
Yeah, well, and a couple months ago, Christina and I went to the food hall there, St. Roche, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that was great. I mean, I feel like to have a really interesting retail and culinary mix in the district is fun to go there now,
Absolutely. I mean, there's enough little kind of cafes that you can kind of stroll into and get something quick. I mean, and obviously, and that food hall too is very kind of user-friendly, easy walk-in.
And they had like music playing outside, I think from the Stefan Kitchen, like live music.
Yeah.
It was just like a cool scene,
or you can obviously go more high-end on the cuisine as well with
of course.
at Michael's Genuine, which really is
staple,
an incredible story in that it was so early on, like a pioneer location in the Design District.
It's got to be one of the longest running restaurants, probably like in that area.
Yeah, and
city.
not only that, but Michael Schwartz was such a pioneer in the farm to table movement. I mean, that really took root. I mean, not that he's the sole pioneer, but that really took root at Michael's Genuine, and I think provided a model for other restaurateurs to emulate and kind of fulfill successfully at other places.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm happy. In a sense, I'm relieved to see the Design District really come into its own. There was a time when I was a little worried about it, but I think it's great. I mean, I think it's really been a major shift in the last year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're talking to Bill Kearney here, editor-in-chief of American Way Magazine. You're listening to the Miami Real Estate Podcast. So we're taking a deep dive, a look at Miami like a local and the beautiful and amazing culinary and retail and cocktail aspects of the city. So, Bill, we talked about the Wynwood Arts District. It's just north of downtown, a little west of Biscayne Boulevard and Design District. A little bit farther to the north. You mentioned Upper East Side before, so tell me what's happening up there, and actually first, if you could put that in geographical context for those who maybe aren't familiar.
Sure. So the Upper East Side is kind of loosely considered the area along and adjacent to Biscayne Boulevard, so running straight north along the bay, on the mainland side of the bay, so north of downtown and north of the Design District. As you drive up Biscayne Boulevard, you're entering into the 50s and the 60s, 70s, 80s. I'd say up to 79th Street, you'd consider that the Upper East Side. And then I actually just moved to Shorecrest, just north of 79th, in the same kind of corridor. So it does feel connected in terms of things changing. And within that swath, you have areas like Little Haiti.
Okay.
You have Lemon City. You have Little River. So it's very hard to actually define the boundaries of these things sometimes, and people will debate you about it. But the larger area to me is like the Upper East Side with these kind of little smaller pockets.
And what are your favorite aspects or go-to spots there?
So I love some of the early entries into the Biscayne Boulevard Redemption. Blue Collar is such a great little restaurant. That is on Biscayne and 68th, I think it is.
Okay.
tiny little restaurant, passionately run with really good value. Like you get a yellowtail snapper entree there for like very, very reasonably priced. Excellent.
Is Blue Collar by Chris Wessel or?
No, Blue Collar is by the same chef that does Mignonette.
Okay.
Daniel Surfer.
Okay.
So so it's funny, Daniel partnered with his buddy to open Mignonette, which is down in just south of Wynwood, in Edgewater, I guess you would call it. So I love Blue Collar, and I also really like Anderson Bar. Partially because I can walk there from my house.
Right.
I mean, to me, I can walk home. I don't have to worry.
Convenient.
It's convenient. But it's also just got this real, it has a lot of fun with 80s nostalgia. All the drink names are kind of goofy, slightly naughty, 80s nostalgia. The music is great. The crowd's, it's like a young, professional, and creative crowd that's not trying to take their weekend too seriously.
Sure.
Which is nice. It's like a super relaxed.
So if we want to find you on the weekend, that's where to look.
Anderson Bar is a good place to find me on the weekend. I mean, and also Panther Coffee has expanded from Wynwood and opened up 2 places on the Upper East Side. One is on Biscayne and 64th. It's like a tiny little coffee shop. And then on Northwest 2nd Avenue in the 50s, they have a larger operation which functions as a coffee shop, but also as their like a large roasting facility.
Oh, interesting.
So, Panther has really made a name for themselves by doing their own roasting in a very kind of much more that's part of what the coffee movement is all about, is how each roaster interprets the bean and when to crack that bean in the arc of the roast. So, Panther has their own way of doing that, their own style, and people seem to love it. So, but I think that kind of speaks to a larger trend in Miami of that more artisanal, specific way of doing business, which is it's
evolving.
It's totally evolving. I mean, it's not mass market. It's not corporate. It's, it's just a more pleasant way to do business, I think.
Absolutely.
So I really enjoy Panther.
I think Avril Jane's doing some interesting things up there in that area as well.
Sure. She's got the Vagabond Hotel, which has been a real hit. I mean, that place languished. So part of the story of the Upper East Side is that people have been saying it's going to blow up for like 15 years. And it's had its little starts and stops and starts and stops. And I think, again, kind of like the design district, it's finally kind of got its foot in the ground and is really striding forward. And Avra definitely was a big part of that in terms of the Vagabond Hotel is a super handsome Mimo little roadside hotel that in the 50s and 60s would see kind of Rat Pack guys come in there for drinks at night. And it was like the heyday of that strip in the 50s and 60s. It was part of that heyday. And then, in the 70s, Biscayne Boulevard really went downhill. But Avra, I don't know when she bought that property, but she's just made it really hip. It has an excellent, really fun, Sunday afternoon pool party. The rooms are super cute. Like each room is painted differently. The very kind of nice, I would say more like mid-century modern but whimsical decor. It has a lot of appeal. It has a lot, like if you're coming to Miami and you don't necessarily want to be in the kind of the melee of South Beach, it's a really nice alternative, a nice place to stay. And I think that affects the overall kind of ambiance of the neighborhood up there too. Because you've got adjacent properties that are kind of upping their game. And Avra's working on, I don't know the full scope of other properties she's working on the Biscayne Boulevard, but I think there's probably 3 or 4 other similar properties that she's revamping. So.
Sure. So take us over to the beach across the bridge. What's worth checking out?
So one of the interesting things about South Beach is that, yes, there's the kind of the South Beach proper, which is famous and well-known, but there's also these little pockets that have been developing nicely in the last 5 years, particularly south of 5th, otherwise known as Sophie, and Sunset Harbor and Mid Beach. So in Sophie, there's been this kind of spate of really beautiful condos going up, and kind of in response to that, there's been some nice retail and restaurants come in. In particular, one restaurant I really love is called Upland.
Right.
Beautiful place, very, I guess I would call it a new American cuisine with an emphasis on rustic. Excellent food. And then there's also a new bar called Scapegoat, which I like. I mean, previously called The Room, which was one of my major hangouts back in the day. Now it's called Scapegoat. And again, it's like this tiny little shadowy den, which is as opposed to a massive club. So it's nice. It's just nice to get that contrast. And then you've got Sunset Harbor, which, that neighborhood changed profoundly with the building of a parking garage that also had. So it was a pain in the butt to go over there and park. Like when you wanted to go over there and eat or whatever, it was always kind of annoying. But in building this really functional garage, they also built some phenomenal retail space. So it's also and the parking in the garage is very cheap. So you kind of feel like you're getting away with something when you park there. It's like just psychologically, it's like, yeah, I go park really cheaply over here.
Sunset Harbor is where the Pub Belly guys originally started.
That's where Pub Belly started.
Love that.
So it's essentially this little alcove, this kind of not alcove, like an enclave. You have to go over a canal to get there. From South Beach. So it feels a little bit separate, but you've got some really nice retail there, like this little shop called Frankie, which has some excellent kind of chic women's wear, and restaurants like Nayara, which is a really fun Thai restaurant with the chef who's like, he's very gregarious, checks out the tables, the food's excellent. And Lucali Pizza, which actually came down from Brooklyn. So it's nice when restaurants from New York feel like Miami is a good investment.
Sure. Well, and I think we were talking off camera that I think I read recently Miami was ranked one of the top 5 foodie cities in America. And so it's sort of fittingly with this advent of new chefs and transplants and new concepts.
Right. No, I mean, and then kind of along those lines, if you want to jump to Mid Beach, which again, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, was kind of this forgotten area, say north of 23rd Street. Now you've got Faina in there. You've got Soho Beach House a little further north, but Faina has profoundly kind of impacted that little strip with, first of all, it's a huge property.
Absolutely.
Super high-end
I went to their
residential.
cabaret show the other night. It was actually really cool, yeah.
And then you have Francis Mallman opening up a restaurant in there. So he's, his stuff is super high-end, delicious, like Argentine, fire-focused, big pieces of ribeye. So can't go wrong with that. So yeah, it's just nice to see, again, it's a diversification of places to go.
So, and speaking of the chef, the Argentine transplant, I think in your July issue, you spotlighted 4 international chefs that have come here and just done amazing work.
We thought it was interesting that, first of all, South America is just this phenomenal place for cuisine. It's just in the last, say, 20 years, I would say, it's seen a real uptick in just adventuresome and dynamic cooking and chefs who are really taking it to the next level. So Miami has become a place where several of those chefs have actually opened up shop. After great success in South America, they've come here. So, I mean, I've got the story here, but one of them is Juan Manuel Barrientos, and from Colombia. He opened El Cielo on the Miami River, and it's a very theatrical kind of presentation, with sculptural food, and you might have kind of a fog mist on the table as you receive your coffee, things like that. But it's also delicious. Another in Brickell, Lamar by Gaston Curio.
Of course.
Phenomenal ceviche. And that story is interesting because, I actually wrote that section of the story, and Peru was was not 20 years ago in Peru, if you were going to a quote unquote fancy restaurant, it was always a French or an Italian restaurant, and there was no sense of pride in Peruvian cuisine. And Gaston, as well as some of his compatriots, received training in Europe and initially came back to Lima and were like, oh, we have to open our fancy French restaurant, and then eventually just jettisoned that whole concept and were like, screw it, we're going to do Peruvian food. The resources here are amazing. Mm-hmm. You've got the Pacific Ocean, you've got the Amazon, right. You've got the Andes, all these incredible flavors coming from these various ecosystems. So they really put an emphasis on Peruvian cuisine. I'm not going to say they reinvented it, but they cultivated it and pulled from this incredible country and these landscapes to create an incredible cuisine. So now we've got Lamar
right.
in Brickell.
And thank God they did, because we're all the beneficiaries.
Oh, absolutely.
Love Peruvian
absolutely.
cuisine. So we talked about Brickell, you mentioned Gaston and Curio. Let's bring it home to the mainland here where we are.
Sure.
Brickell Avenue, Brickell, downtown. What are some of the key spots to live and dine?
So I think part of the real psychological shift in downtown is what has happened with the cultural elements.
Of course.
So you've got the Art Center, you've got PAM, which is an incredibly beautiful building, mm-hmm. Designed by Herzog de Meuron, and you have the new Frost Science Museum, which is just a couple footsteps away from PAM. So right. Within a 300-yard radius, you've got these and the Art Center. So you've got these three super important and powerful and enriching cultural institutions right in downtown.
Right.
So as people who live in downtown can not only gaze upon them, they are beautiful, mm-hmm. but go there, can literally walk out your front door and walk right to these institutions, which are, again, like changing the definition of Miami. Like, we now have a serious and elaborate and fantastic science museum.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Which is something we've never. We have had a science museum for 50 years, but it was not nearly what it is today.
Right.
So that's been a major. I think that's. You look at it a couple ways. Like, it's a psychological shift, but it's also a branding shift for the city.
I think so. And with Basel, I think that culturally and in the arts world, we've really elevated our stature here in the city.
I totally agree. Certainly Art Basel has changed the way people see Miami and the way Miami sees itself. Mm-hmm. It goes back to the idea of, if you're a family and you're living here, you've got these elements to the area. Let's say if you're gonna have kids, it's like now the place where you're raising your children has these cultural institutions, which I believe is a good thing, and it rubs off on people, and it just creates a different kind of mental landscape.
Absolutely. And recently there was a report in the Miami Herald, I think by the Downtown Development Authority, that more families than ever are moving to downtown, and the cultural institutions and the lifestyle and the way of life is a big part of that, I think.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. Typically you think of families moving to single-family homes, but yeah, there's nothing to say that
a lot of strollers in downtown now.
Right, that's cool.
We're talking to Bill Kearney, editor-in-chief of American Way magazine. Bill, when you are not enriching yourself culturally in the arts and museum institutions in downtown, where can you grab a bite to eat? I think Zuma kicked it off so many years ago in downtown.
Oh, Zuma's fantastic. In downtown, actually, I love to go to All Day Cafe, which is it's on North Miami Avenue and 11th Street. It's owned by the same gentleman who owns a bar called The Corner, mm-hmm. which is also an excellent bar. The Corner I will describe as kind of a shadowy, somewhat hipsterish bar, and it's not a derogatory term for me.
We love hipsters.
But they have a fantastic jazz night on Tuesday nights, good happy hour. Again, it's like a small venue where you can kind of just sit outside and relax. And then all day it just has phenomenal coffee, great sandwiches, and very, it's simple food but done with excellent ingredients, so mm-hmm. it kind of pays off. And then on the higher end, like you mentioned, Zuma is fantastic. I actually have been doing some shopping in Brickell City Center.
One of the biggest.
Bought myself a bow tie. But I've been to La Centrale quite a bit, and that is really fun.
Yeah, and I think, so going back to food halls, I think that's one of the biggest trends we're seeing, or future forecast, right?
For sure. I mean, even in Brickell City Center, you have two Italian-focused food halls. So La Centrale is, it functions as a market. I mean, you can literally go in there and buy pasta to take home and get some charcuterie to take home, or you can sit down and eat your charcuterie plate right there, or order off of a restaurant menu.
Right.
I mean, it's really, and I've found it to be excellent food.
Absolutely. And then also in Brickell City Center, you have the Casa Tua Cocina, the other food hall you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can walk out the door of that food hall into Saks Fifth Avenue, so it's kind of funny.
Steps away.
But Brickell City Center is a lot logistically easier than I thought it would be. Like driving in, the parking's great. It's less of a hassle than I thought.
Yeah, and I live in Brickell, so my favorite is to take the Metro Mover there, and it actually leaves you right on the third floor. It's super convenient.
It's great, yeah.
Yeah, and so what else so Novikov just opened, right? That's in the...
I haven't been there yet, but I've heard phenomenal things about it.
Heard good things, and then Komodo also here in Brickell was pretty interesting. I think that's Dave Grutman.
That's David Grutman's restaurant. So David is a nightlife kingpin and has shifted some of his energy into becoming a restaurateur, and he's doing it. I mean,
I was there, so they opened a little over a year ago, but I was there, I think, last Friday or the Friday before, and I was amazed at how just packed and still busy it was. So I was happy to see that thriving in our backyard. And then speaking of nightlife kingpins, you have the guys from Bioli who opened Marion and the adjacent El Toucan.
Marion's great.
Yeah, it's
really
awesome.
Really great. And El Toucan is such a classy throwback, you know? I mean, it's this kind of dinner, I wouldn't call it dinner theater, but it's a show. I mean, it's a live dance and music show that people get dressed up. You know, it's not, I think for a local, it's fantastic. But if you're from Chicago or Boston, like that is a spectacular.
It's definitely
thing.
a unique Miami experience that you have to sort of take in when you're here.
Right. And then you've got, right down Cayocho, you've got Ball and Chain.
Right.
So, and that's another area, like Little Haiti Little Havana has really, again, like just new dynamic places opening up. It's fun to see.
Absolutely. And so one of the other, I think, big shifts or items in the pipeline for the downtown mainland area we were talking about before was the Biscayne line. Potentially or proposed Biscayne line connecting via boardwalk, right, downtown up to the Edgewater.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it could actually connect from 36th Street all the way down to the Rickenbacker Causeway, which is a massive amount of land. But I think to start off, the focus has been a lot on Edgewater, where Edgewater is this area in the 20s and 30s along the bay that has several condo towers have gone up there in the last 5 years.
We're actually working on Elysee Miami there. Biscayne Beach, one of the ones that just launched, and Ari on the Bay. Definitely great views.
So as these developments come in, by law, they have to have a public space on the waterfront. So the effort is to connect all of those public spaces into a promenade that would really connect Edgewater to downtown and all the culture and energy there, which of course is just like respiration of ideas and people and economy as well.
Right, the city is really coming into its own. It's evolving. It's exciting.
So there's some older properties, that pre-1979 properties in Edgewater, where that walkway would have to either go inland around those properties or abut out into the bay, which has been kind of an architectural challenge that has been addressed by various students at So it's really nice to bring in the universities and kind of expand the community effort to make this happen. And it's not clear to me yet when it will fully happen, but it's certainly something that a lot of people care about, a lot of developers in that area care about, and I would love to see it happen. So in the end, it would run you'd be able to jog or ride your bike or walk your dog from 36th Street down to the Miami River, let's say.
Yeah.
Which would be, I'd love to do that.
As would I. So, speaking of the future, tell me to close it out, Bill. What are you most excited about for the years to come here in Miami?
So I'm excited about more projects like the Biscayne Line that take the water and make it part of everyone's life. Mm-hmm. Because you can live in, Kendall, or you can live in Miami Shores, unless you're going to the beach, you might never see the ocean.
That's true.
And it's a shame because it's so beautiful. So I'm looking forward to more projects that take the community and connect the community to the Miami River or to the Bay. I mean, there are similar steps being taken along the Miami River to make that every waterfront area along the river accessible to the public and walkable by the public. So you could walk from Zuma up the Miami River on the north side to Garcia's.
Right.
As this develops. And I think that's the kind of community or urban planning that Miami has never really had.
Right.
I mean, we're a really young city. In 1906, there was like 100 people living like off on the banks of the Miami River. And it's so in our explosion as a city, and particularly post-World War II, there wasn't a lot of urban planning. And I think we're playing catch up a little bit, but it's happening. I think there's a lot of people who care at this point about making Miami more livable, more resilient. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation in terms of climate change, but resiliency is completely possible. It's
right.
Again, we have to devote ourselves to it, and I think that is happening. So
the future is bright.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Bill, thank you so much for coming in. I hope that you all took some notes. A lot of great places to check out when you are in the city, whether you're visiting or living here. I hope you'll come back again in the near future, Bill. And for those of you out there, pick up An American Way next time you're on flight and take a read.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we certainly enjoyed making it. We hope you will come back. We've got some more great content dedicated to informing, intriguing, and inspiring Miami real estate professionals. Where can you find us? We're on the podcast store wherever podcasts are available. That's iTunes, of course. We're also on Podbean, Spotify, Audible, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Google Play. You can even ask Alexa about us. Go ahead and visit cervera.com/blog. That's where our newsroom is located. We've got some more great content there as well, market reports, and more. You can sign up for our newsletter there. Connect with us on social @CerveraRE, or send us an email, miamirealestatepodcast@cervera.com. We would love to hear from you. So from all of us here in Miami, where the future is always bright, until next time.